Welcome to this week's episode of Case Files. We take a look at some of the cases 11 Investigates has worked on over the past few years. I'm investigative anchor Melissa Andrews.
And I am lead investigator Brian Duggar. This week we're taking a look at the 1960 murder of 14-year-old Nancy Eagleson. Now, it's a case that has never been solved, but the Sheriff's Department does have a really good suspect, and that's largely because of our investigation.
This is the first time we've broken a case into 2 episodes, but we've spent more than 2.5 years on this story, so there's a lot to talk about. This week we'll be focusing on the murder. Next week, Brian's investigation.
So we're going to start by watching the very first story we did on this case, and that was back in February of 2023.
You know who gets lucky in these cases? The killer. The victim doesn't get lucky. She didn't get lucky at all that night. Nothing went her way.
For decades, Nancy Eagleson's murder has haunted the village of Paulding.
I started having nightmares.
14-year-old Nancy Eagleson was scooped up off the street near her home, raped, murdered, and left in woods outside of town in November of 1960. Her younger sister Cheryl witnessed Nancy being dragged away, and because of that night, the nightmares are still vivid.
And I would actually chase my sister down the road and ask her who killed her. Because I knew in my heart that was the only one that could tell me who it was.
I was within 10 feet of the car.
But during our investigation, we found another possible witness.
I know the shape of the car, I know the shape of the taillights, I know what the seats look like, and I think she was going to make a move to the front door, but he grabbed her and pulled her the rest of the way over. Then she got up, and he pulled her down again by the hair, and she never came back up.
He says they were spotted by the man, and the killer took off. His Corvair couldn't keep up.
It happened so fast.
He says he went to Sheriff John Keeler, but that report doesn't exist. He believes he saw a police car, and the absence of the report, according to him, proves the sheriff wanted to bury his information.
Oh, they've never called me, asked me nothing. And there's a good reason, because they knew who did it.
There are a lot of local people who have developed the opinion that John Keeler is responsible for covering this crime up. And I didn't know John Keeler from the Man in the Moon, but I can't think professionally that anybody would be corrupt enough to try to do something like that.
In fact, there was a lot of evidence that was initially collected. But now that early evidence is gone.
So there's a lot of ways that these things can be lost. Am I excusing that? No, nobody would excuse that. Sheriff Landers doesn't excuse that.
To lose evidence in a homicide case that's, regardless if it's solved or concluded, is just irresponsible. You know, shoes and purse, and just things of that nature would be physical evidence that we should still today have in our possession, and we don't.
A lot came up missing. We don't know where it's at. We don't know if it'll ever turn up. But we've waited all this time, and it's since 1985 when I went to the Sheriff's Department. They didn't have it. We know it's not there since then.
A Paulding County judge revived hopes of a family searching for answers in a 1960 murder today. The judge approved the request of Nancy Eagleson's family to exhume her body to search for DNA evidence.
You've done a great job. Thank you so much. I didn't want to exhume her. I didn't want to do that at all, but I knew it was the last thing to give her the justice she deserves.
The heart-wrenching gamble paid off. Shockingly, a bullet was found in the casket in late October. A second autopsy done in Toledo changed the cause of death to multiple gunshots. Now that the bullet has been found, the gun is the key piece of missing evidence.
I've got what I think is the gun that killed her.
While talking to Roanhouse, he made an unexpected claim.
I've got it. sitting in the office in a plastic bag. Ta-da! Haven't had it out for a while. The guy I got it from told my sister at a class reunion that he had the gun. It could be the murder weapon because somebody sold it to him 2 weeks after that happened. He said, I have to get rid of this gun.
And that gun appears to be a .22 caliber, the same caliber used to kill Nancy.
Other stuff has disappeared. It ain't going anywhere until it gets to people who's going to test it.
And it will be tested. After being told by 11 investigators of Roanhouse's statements, a BCI agent picked up the gun, and it will be compared to the bullet in Nancy's casket, possibly providing a break in the 62-year-old mystery.
I believe there's hope. I won't ever give that up. So that's all I can do is just ask if anyone has anything, please come forward. Find it in your heart to come forward and tell us.
So we just watched this story. What interested you in this case?
Yeah, the Porch Light Project, I believe they had actually reached out to me in like late 2022. And the Porch Light Project, it's this really cool group that kind of works with cold cases. And many times they're actually pay for DNA testing. And at that point, they were going to pay to have Nancy's body exhumed because they thought they might be able to get some sort of additional evidence.
Because there was no DNA, obviously, when she was killed.
Well, there was actually DNA, and we'll get more into that, but all that DNA disappeared. I mean, this was obviously 1960, so they didn't know it was DNA at the time, but there were a lot of things that would have had DNA, like, you know, nail clippings, hair, there was a bloody fingerprint, semen was involved. You know, but again, they didn't know about DNA back then, but if they would have kept that, they would have had it now.
When I watch this story, I feel so much for Cheryl. What a traumatic thing to go through and see and live with for her.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, she was 5 years old at the time, and she was a witness. She was the only witness to this actually taking place. And so I spent a lot of time talking to Meryl, and we'll talk a little bit more about her later.
She's the other sister.
But Meryl's the other sister who wasn't even born at that point. But Cheryl was alive. Nancy was 14 years old. Cheryl was 5. And so what we know about this case is that their mother, Betty, she worked at the drive-in. Their father, Donald, worked at the bowling alley. So this was a Sunday afternoon back in November 13th, 1960. And Donald was going to take Betty, drop her off at the drive-in, go to his job over at the bowling alley. And the girls, they're like, well, we don't have anything to do. So they decided they were going to go see a double feature in town. And the main show that was playing was David and Bathsheba, starring Gregory Peck and Susan Hayward. And this was like in town, which is just about a mile from their house. So after they did this, they stopped over at Johnson's Restaurant, which is kind of on the town square. They're going to get some sodas with friends. And then they kind of wandered over to the bowling alley to see if their dad would give them a ride home. And we actually, so when I talked to Cheryl and Sheriff Jason Landers, they kind of walked me through what happened then. So at this point, they're leaving the bowling alley. They decide to walk home, and this is what they told us.
You know, Cheryl and Nancy are walking home ultimately from the movie theater in downtown Paulding. They stop and have some drinks at a local restaurant a couple blocks away, and then they start to walk home, which is, you know, maybe equivalent to 4 or 5 town blocks.
So as we was walking around the corner there, she was holding my hand, and I noticed a car behind us going real slow. And I remember looking over my shoulder, and I looked back at her and I said, Nancy, I think someone's following us.
As they're near their residence, a vehicle pulls up to them, described as a dark-colored four-door vehicle.
Right in here, a little ways is where he started asking if we wanted to ride.
And he rolled his window down and he said, "Would you girls like a ride home?" And Nancy said, "No, thank you, we're almost there." And he just kind of creeped along with us as we walked. And he said it again, "Would you girls like a ride home?" She said, "No, thank you, we're almost there."
He ultimately parks the vehicle on the road, gets out, grabs a hold of Nancy, ultimately abducts her, throws her into the vehicle.
Threw her in the back seat, and then he's in here like this. And I couldn't see what he was doing, so I jumped on his back, and he just went like this and pushed me to the ground.
So when I fell back on the ground, I just realized that this is a bad man. This is not a good man. I jumped up, ran up to the neighbor's house. It was Mrs. Larson, and she would babysit for me once in a while, so I knew him well. And I knocked on the door, and I kept watching the car, and he was just fumbling around in his pockets and everything. And when she finally came to the door, he had just closed her door. But as he did, I seen her in the back seat setting up with her head laying on the back seat of the car, like she was out, she was knocked out.
One of the things that stands out to me is you would think that Cheryl would be more vulnerable because she was 5 and Nancy was 14, and obviously she was looking after a very young child, Cheryl, but it was her who ended up trying to save and protect Nancy.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I don't know whether it dealt with where the girls were positioned. You know, maybe Nancy was on the inside and this guy knew that, hey, if I'm gonna take someone, I'm gonna have to take them quick. So Nancy's bigger, maybe more to grab onto, and you know, he was able to quickly grab her and throw her into the car.
Do you think that there was a chance that whoever did this was actually targeting Nancy specifically?
Yeah.
Instead of just picking an older one, that he knew who she was?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think she was targeted. And again, we're going to get into so much more of this over the next 2 episodes, but the big question around town has always been, was this a local guy or was this a guy from outside of town? Now, initially, most people believed it was somebody from outside of town and passing through, but I can tell you from our investigation, I very much believe it was a local man.
All right, so that'll be the next episode. Let's go back to what's happening right after we hear from Cheryl. This is about 7:30 at night. What unfolds over the next few hours here?
Yeah, so you have to think of Paulding back then. There were only a couple thousand people that lived there, and there's not a whole lot more now, but it was a small town, it was a very safe town. People didn't sleep with their...
Yeah, I can kind of envision it. We've seen so many movies, right, that are set in the 50s and early 60s, and maybe there's an ice cream shop in the movie theater, the bowling alley. Teenagers may drive their cars around and everybody feels safe, right?
Yeah, and there's the town square. Again, it had the town square with the soda shop, you know, the bowling alley. Just people would hang out around the town square. And, you know, their house was no more than, it was less than a mile away. Now it was on Flat Rock Drive, which was also known as State Route 111, which was at that point like the main highway through town, and this kind of went right through past their house. So what we know happened.
So they went to the movies, they were gonna go to get ice cream, and then they were gonna walk that mile home?
They were. So what ended up happening, you know, they went over to the bowling alley because Nancy had just gotten her first pair of high-heeled shoes. She'd been walking around in them all day. Her feet were killing her. So she went over to the bowling alley and they're like, "Dad, can you please just drive us home?" And he's like, "Well, if you guys want to hang out for a bit, I can do it when I get a break, but I can't do it right now." And they're just like, "Forget it, Dad. You know, we're just going to walk home."
Oh my God.
It was 60 degrees in November, so it's a warm November day. You know, they had light coats on. Again, this is something that they had done. Nobody even thought twice about walking after dark in Paulding. So there's a couple things that we know, because we know that Cheryl runs up to the neighbor's house. This is a woman who babysat for them. They didn't have a phone in their house, so the husband had to take Cheryl, and they found a phone booth, or maybe they even ran down to the sheriff's office, but they kind of called the sheriff and kind of report on this.
And remember, this is a 5-year-old girl. This is a small child.
Yeah, this is a 5-year-old girl. She's the only witness. There's, maybe like one street light on that road, so it wasn't a highly visible area. But what Cheryl did know, she could tell it was a white man wearing glasses, a suit, and a fedora. And you don't see the fedora there, but this is a sketch that Cheryl had actually helped put together. Or this may have been one of the older ones, but recently Cheryl actually got together with the sheriff's department, and they did do a new sketch. Again, looks just like that guy, but they added the fedora on top of it. Now you're like, why would a guy, this was Sunday night, why would he be wearing a suit and a fedora? But it wasn't that unusual for that time. So the years after this, Cheryl said she would go through all the old high school yearbooks and see if there was anybody there that it would just kind of ring something. And she said the interesting thing was most of the guys back then looked like that guy.
Those glasses, those 1950s, 60s
with the glasses. Remember, I mean, we didn't have contacts back then.
That
most
was
of the guys,
style of glasses.
Yeah, and they had, short cropped hair. She said he was a little bit graying. And she said that she could smell what she thought at the time was alcohol. But, there have been theories over the years, including with investigators, that it could have been chloroform. It could have been something, because she saw him fiddling around in his pockets. Now, did he have a cloth with chloroform, put it over her, mouth, and then throw her in the car? Because what we do know, when Nancy went into the car, he said her head kind of went back, and it kind of collapsed against the back of the car seat. And this is a 14-year-old girl fighting because she's just been taken. You have to think she's probably knocked out.
Let me ask you this. When we talk about cold cases, the issue usually is that a lot of the people, the investigators, family members, witnesses, die because it's been so many years. This was 1960. It seems that Cheryl almost has a photographic memory, probably because it was a traumatic event that she's remembering. But do you and does Cheryl have confidence in these memories being consistent and accurate even all these years later, to where she's able to give somewhat of a new sketch and describe that smell and speculate that it could be used in the abduction?
Yeah, I mean, you think about that, and when I think back over my life, and Cheryl is a little bit older than me, I think she's about several years older than me. She's about 70 now, so I mean, this was 65 years ago, and when I think back to when I was 5 years old, I have a hard time remembering anything from that time period. But this is something that was so ingrained in her brain over the years, and she constantly would have nightmares. And after this happened, they actually brought her down, and they hypnotized her, I believe, a couple different times to try to get her to identify exactly who this person was. And she told me, and she told them, she didn't recognize the guy. She could identify him, but she didn't recognize him. They offered her a pony if she would just tell them who it was. And again, this goes back to, was this a local guy? Was it a guy?
So did they sense that she was afraid, and she knew more and she was afraid?
I mean, I think they sensed that, look, you were there, you jumped on the guy's back, you saw right in front of you this guy. Tell us who he was.
So that was a lot of pressure for her.
It was a lot of pressure. I mean, she's 5 years old. It's dark. The guy's wearing a fedora. I mean, I thought she did incredibly just to say that he had graying hair, glasses, white.
The smell that she went back
that
in the
she
seat.
had. So, after this happens, again, this is a small town. Everybody knows everyone. So the word went out really quickly that Nancy Eagleson has been taken. She's been kidnapped. We saw the abductor take her down Route 111. So right away, you know, the auxiliary police officers, the sheriff's deputy, the sheriff, everybody in town, they start forming these search parties, and, you know, they get together pretty quickly. And, you know, at one point, Cheryl was in the sheriff's department. This is something that kind of makes me think it was a local guy, and I have a very good hunch who I believe it is. But when she was in the sheriff's department, she was sitting on her dad's lap, and a deputy came into the department, and she screamed, "That's him!" So when this guy walked in, so we can tell you more about that guy, you know, further down the road here.
In part two, but
so all these people are getting together. They're scouring the countryside. They're going through. And an interesting tidbit is that Cheryl's family, they're like in a car. They're going down these country roads. They got to this one road, and Sheriff John Keeler was kind of there at the intersection of the roads, and they're like, "Hey, we're going to go search down here." He's like, "Don't worry about it. We've already searched down there." So, you know, they kind of turn off and go somewhere else, and that is where they actually ended up finding the body, back in the area where he said they'd already searched.
So he didn't know at the time that the body was there, or are you suggesting he was trying to throw him off? More for part two.
More for part two.
But really, it only took a few hours. I think that's so unusual. It would only took a few hours to find her body.
Yeah.
Does that imply anything about the assailant, the killer, in that regard?
So we asked Sheriff Jason Landers, and I love Sheriff Landers. He's just a really good guy, a lot of integrity.
Who really wants to solve this.
He really wants to solve it. You know, he's like 6'7", 6'8", so he's this monster of a man when you meet him, but a good guy. So we asked him about that, and he told us about what happened, how they found the body. Let's watch that.
The assailant, after he abducted Nancy, drove about 7 miles or so towards the city of Defiance, just about to Junction, Ohio, and pulled just off of State Route 111, maybe a quarter mile. The road State Route 111 takes a 90-degree turn. This person went straight onto what's County Road 176, and just about a quarter mile down, there's a woods there that today many people call Nancy's Woods. And it's on the south side of the road, and ultimately that's where her body was found several hours after the abduction.
Okay, so she's in these woods. So how did they find her so quickly?
Yeah, so at about 2:30, there were two raccoon hunters that were out there, Joseph Offrance and Kenny Nelson. They were buddies. They would often go out raccoon hunting, and for some reason, I believe at that point in Paulding, on a Sunday, you couldn't do it till after midnight. I don't know why. I guess it was maybe a religious thing, like you used to not be able to buy beer on Sunday, but maybe you couldn't raccoon hunt on Sunday. So they were in the woods, and they had dogs, and a dog kind of hit upon a smell, and it kind of led them to Nancy's body. And so this is at 2:30 in the morning. You know, they've got their guns. They come walking out of the woods carrying their guns, and they happen upon a state trooper who was just passing by. And they're carrying guns, remember, coming out of the woods. So
And a girl has just gone missing.
And a girl's just gone missing. So they were a little scared. So, you know, they're like, "Look, no, we just found something back there." So they kind of lead them to them, and then they find Nancy's body. And, you know, I've seen all the crime scene photos. You know, she's lying just like she's asleep in the woods.
Like on her back,
on her
fully
back,
clothed.
She was lying on her back. You know, the autopsy that they did on her showed that she'd been shot with a .22 and that she had been raped. And the evidence that was collected at the scene, they got a scarf, they got her clothes, they got her undergarments. There was hair that they found in a nearby tree branch. There seemed to be some sort of paint, possibly from a car. I think the car is like taking her body. Well, we actually don't know where she was killed. We don't know if she was killed in the car or whether the car drove into the woods, raped her there, and killed her there. But there seemed to be some sort of paint from the car on a stump that was in the woods, and there was a bloody handprint on her arm.
And semen.
And semen. They recovered semen, fingernail clippings. So there was a lot of evidence in the initial reports. They had a lot of evidence at that scene. And this wasn't, I mean, this was in an area, I think, where locals kind of described it as almost like a lover's lane type area where, you know, the kids would kind of go back in this area because there's a little mound that would obscure it from the main road, but they kind of go back here and
I think that's interesting. To me, that implies someone who knows
the area.
the area. So you talked to Joseph Offrance's daughter. He's one of the men who found Nancy's body that was raccoon hunting. What did you guys talk about?
Yeah, that was a really interesting conversation. We just kind of, you know,
I assume he's dead.
He is. And it was an interesting conversation because there were a lot of suspects in this case initially, and Joseph was one of them.
Right, because sometimes you are when you're the one who discovers the body.
Yeah, I mean, he came home like really late that night, and he told his wife that, hey, just so you know, I'm going to be a suspect. I'm going to be a suspect. You know, I was out there, found the body. And, you know, they had him down to the police station and talked to him. But it was interesting talking to the daughter. She said they had a couple of really interesting experiences over the years where, in one case, he was in a bar with Kenny Nelson, the other guy who found the body. And he seemed to be someone overheard him saying, and he was drunk, saying, I can't take it anymore, I got to tell, or I got to say something. And, you know, this person told me that, you know, he was led, it may have even been his daughter, that he was led out of the bar and said, no, just shut up, don't say anything. And there was another case where the daughter told me about, they had gone on kind of a family vacation, and there was a girl who looked incredibly like Nancy that came into the area where they were, and Joseph basically lost his mind. He started, like, you know, getting visibly upset that he saw this person.
Does she think that her dad had anything to do with it?
I will say that she thought some of the stuff was unusual, but I think I did ask her that question, and she doesn't think so.
Now, you could also look at it as he obviously found something, again, that was very traumatic.
Yeah, of course.
In a very small town.
Of course.
And did he have an alcohol problem?
I don't know that he had an alcohol problem. I mean, I think it's probably just back then, you know, a lot of the guys just like go out to the bar and have a beer or something. But there was another thing that interested me about him is that Nancy would sometimes be over his house, sleeping over with the daughter.
So he knew Nancy and then found her.
He did.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it was interesting. And that's
Did he look anything like the photos, the composites?
Yeah, and like I said, you know, that wasn't unusual because a lot of the guys at that time, I mean, a lot of them looked like that. So a lot of people that we looked at, I mean, there were, you know, they were looking at serial killers from out of town who they knew were kind of passing through. One, I think, had been hanging out at the bar right around the time that she disappeared.
I want to talk about the other sister again, Meryl, because you know, we have Cheryl, who was 5, Nancy 14, and Meryl wasn't yet born. What did she say to you?
Yeah, so Meryl was really the person who, from the very beginning, she drove this investigation. I mean, we would spend hours just lying in bed talking to her on the phone, or like messaging her, not talking, but texting back and forth on Messenger, or like even messages, just kind of exchanging ideas about what we thought. And she just had volumes of information. The police report in this case was more than 1,000 pages. I saw a lot of stuff that she didn't even see. But she was just, you talk about a good investigator. I mean, she really was. She looked into this, and we would just bounce names off, and she'd say, oh yeah, let me tell you something about this guy. So she was really driven to kind of get this done. And you know, back in March, I mean, we kept this, again, I started this back in the middle of 2022, and over the years, I mean, we would constantly be in touch. But back in March, I was thinking, you know, I hadn't talked to Meryl in a little bit. I need to check in to see if she's heard anything new. And then I found out she died back in March, and she was really driven by trying to get answers. And, you know, obviously I think she agreed with me, the person that I think was involved in this case, but it's very sad to me that she wasn't able to get that complete closure.
And were Meryl and Cheryl close? Did they work on the case together?
They were. I mean, Meryl more so than Cheryl, because again, I think Cheryl is so traumatized by this. And you know, the one final clip that we have is actually of Cheryl talking about what this has done to her over her life. So let's play that.
You know, I'd never see my sister again. It's so hard because I've, over the years, I've always blamed myself. Because I was the last one to see her, besides the man that killed her.
I feel for her almost more than many victims of crimes that you hear about, because again, she was so young. And then you mentioned too that they went to their dad and said, hey, can you bring us home? And he must have felt also incredible guilt that he had to tell them no because he was working. So not only did she experience this traumatic crime and seeing it, but then probably had to deal with a lot of emotions from her parents, especially her dad maybe having some guilt. And I'm sure it changed their lives completely.
I mean, this wasn't like she was 25 years old and she got to live 25 good years. I mean, her entire childhood was destroyed. And you know, after this happened, they went and stayed with their grandmother because they were scared. And Cheryl told me the story that at one point she was in there
scared that the killer would come back for her.
Because she was a witness.
Yeah.
At one point she's kind of sitting in the living room by herself and the back door slams open and she screams and her grandmother and her dad and all those people come running in. Well, they ended up finding a screwdriver and a knife outside the back door. And they filed a police report, and that police report is gone. But Cheryl believes that that could have been the killer trying to take care of a loose end.
And only so many people have access to police reports. So that's a good place to end for this episode. And I think that's going to lead us in the direction that we want to talk about for the next episode. So we're going to talk about that probably, is some of the documents that have disappeared as part of the investigation. What else are we going to hear next time?
Yeah, I mean, next time we're going to talk to Nick Edwards, who's actually a very popular podcast host for the True Crime Garage. He's going to come in. I work with him a lot on this case. So he's going to give us some insight. But we're really going to look at our investigation and some of the characters that we met along the way. And there's just some fascinating stuff that we encountered along the way. And then ultimately, we're going to tell you who we believe was behind this.
Excellent. I've really enjoyed hearing you talk about it, and shout out the little bits as we sit across from each other in the newsroom as you uncover them over the years. So that's going to do it for this episode of Case Files, but we'll have part 2 of the Nancy Eagleson mystery coming up next week. Join us for that.